The sun spilled through the glass windows of Gate C-12 as the morning rush of passengers shuffled onto Flight 417 bound for Washington, D.C. Among them was a tall, rugged man in his late 30s carrying a worn-out duffel bag in one hand and holding onto the tiny fingers of a little girl with the other. His daughter, maybe 7 years old, clutched a stuffed rabbit with ears that had long lost their fluff, and she looked around at the crowded terminal with wide, curious eyes. To anyone watching, he was just another single father doing his best, keeping calm as his child peppered him with questions and tugged at his sleeve. His boarding pass showed Seat 12F, a window seat in economy class, nothing out of the ordinary. But what no one knew, not the flight attendant smiling politely, not the businessman tapping away on his laptop, not even the little girl skipping along beside him, was that this quiet man once had a call sign whispered with reverence across military hangars, the kind of call sign that made the toughest fighter pilots sit straighter and generals lower their voices. His name was buried under layers of secrecy, his past hidden behind classified files and unmarked medals tucked into a box at the back of his closet. He wasn't just a father, he was a ghost of the skies, a man who once flew missions others didn't come back from, a legend who disappeared without a farewell. As the plane filled up, he settled into his seat, placing his daughter by the window so she could watch the runway. She pressed her nose to the glass, whispering about how small the cars looked below and how she wanted to fly someday. He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, the weight of the world buried behind his calm expression. The passengers around him saw only a man traveling with his child. They couldn't know that only a few years ago, this same man once flew above deserts and oceans, cutting through clouds in a machine that answered only to his touch, making decisions that meant life or death for hundreds below. He hadn't planned on anyone recognizing him here. For years, he'd tried to stay invisible, just another father trying to build a life for his daughter after tragedy tore their family apart. But fate has a way of forcing the past into the present. It began midway through the flight, somewhere over the Carolinas, when the captain's voice came through the intercom, calm yet strained, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked to maintain holding pattern due to unexpected restricted airspace activity. We appreciate your patience." Passengers groaned, muttered complaints about delays, but the man in 12F stiffened, his jaw tightening. He knew the tone beneath the words. Something was wrong up here. He could feel it in the silence that followed, in the way the engines hummed differently, in the unusual bank of the plane. His daughter leaned against his arm, unbothered, already drifting toward sleep, but his mind was alert, analyzing every detail like he used to in the cockpit. Moments later, a shadow ripped past the cabin windows, sleek and fast, a blur that made passengers gasp. Then another. F-22 Raptors, cutting across the sky with a speed and grace that no commercial airliner could match. Gasps filled the cabin as the fighters pulled alongside the plane, one on each wing, their presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. Phones came out, passengers filming through the windows, whispering that maybe it was a terrorist scare, maybe someone on board was a threat. Fear rippled through the cabin. But in Seat 12F, the man's lips curved into the faintest, knowing smile. He recognized the formation, the discipline in the turns. These weren't just random escorts. They were looking for someone. And he already knew who. The intercom crackled again, this time the captain's voice was tighter, urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are being escorted due to a communication request. Everything is under control." But it wasn't under control. Not for the crew, not for the passengers. And soon, not for the pilots flying outside. The man reached into his duffel bag slowly, ignoring the nervous glance of the businessman beside him, and pulled out a small radio receiver, an old piece of gear no ordinary traveler would carry. He switched it on, static crackling before a voice came through clear, commanding, "Flight 417, identify passenger code name Ghost Falcon. Repeat, we have visual confirmation. Request acknowledgement." Every hair on the man's arm stood on end. His daughter stirred but didn't wake, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. The cabin was buzzing with unease, but he blocked it all out, staring through the window at the Raptors slicing the sky beside them. He hadn't heard that call sign in years. Ghost Falcon. His call sign. A name whispered in operations rooms, feared across battlefields, spoken with respect by every pilot who ever flew near him. He thought he'd buried it, locked it away when he hung up his wings for good. And yet here it was, being called again, dragging him back into a world he thought he'd left forever. He reached up, pressed the flight attendant call button, and when she hurried over, nervous and smiling too hard, he spoke low, steady, his voice carrying an authority that made her pause. "Tell the captain seat 12F is Ghost Falcon. He'll know what that means." She blinked, confused, until she caught the look in his eyes, something steely and unshakable that made her legs move before her mind could catch up. Within moments, murmurs ran through the cabin as crew members exchanged hurried whispers, eyes darting toward him. He remained calm, gently stroking his daughter's hair, waiting. Then, through his earpiece, the Raptor's channel broke into static again before a new voice, sharper, younger, but tinged with awe, came through. "Ghost Falcon. Sir, this is Viper 1. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but for the man in seat 12F, the sound wasn't just background noise anymore. It was a trigger, pulling him back into the roaring skies of his past, into missions that never made the news, into nights where the stars were his only witnesses. He sat there, stone still, while the F-22s maintained their formation, holding the sky around them like silent guardians. Passengers murmured nervously, pointing their phones toward the window, trying to capture a moment they couldn't possibly understand. To them, this was a scare, a strange detour, maybe even an inconvenience. But to him, this was a summoning. Ghost Falcon had been found, and once your call sign was spoken again, there was no escaping it. The captain himself came back, a man in his late 50s with gray streaking his temples and a voice that usually carried calm authority, but now trembled with something closer to reverence. He crouched low by seat 12F, his voice just above a whisper. "Sir. The Air Force has confirmed. They're ordering me to divert. They're saying you're priority 1. His eyes darted to the little girl beside him, sleeping against her stuffed rabbit, and his voice cracked. "I don't know who you are, but I've never heard them speak like that. Ever." The man, once Ghost Falcon, now just a father, nodded slightly. "Do as they say, Captain. Everything will be fine." His voice was steady, calm, and the captain, though confused, obeyed without question. That was the effect Ghost Falcon had always had. Men followed, not because of orders, but because of the gravity in his words. The plane banked slowly, guided now by the Raptors, turning away from Washington's usual flight path. Gasps filled the cabin. Passengers whispered fears of hijacking or military emergency, but the truth was stranger than any rumor. Up in the cockpit of the Raptors, voices crackled in awe. "Ghost Falcon. Sir, it's an honor." Another pilot chimed in, "I studied your maneuvers in training, your evasion pattern in Red Valley, it's legendary." And another, almost whispering, "We thought you were dead." He heard them all, and for a moment, the weight of those words pressed against his chest. Dead. That's what he had allowed the world to believe. Because it was safer that way. Safer for his daughter. Safer for the world. The diversion took them not to a civilian airport, but toward a sprawling air base, its runways stretching like ribbons of steel across the landscape. As the wheels touched down, passengers erupted with questions, phones recording, confusion spreading like wildfire. But before anyone could move, military police and ground crew swarmed the plane. The door opened, and standing there were officers in full uniform, their faces tight with both fear and respect. One stepped forward, saluting sharply. "Ghost Falcon. Sir. Command is waiting." The man rose slowly, careful not to wake his daughter just yet, and the entire row seemed to shrink away from him. realizing he wasn't just another dad on vacation. He was someone different, someone dangerous, someone revered. He scooped his daughter into his arms, her small head resting on his shoulder, and walked down the aisle with the kind of quiet authority that turned every head. The moment his boots hit the tarmac, the F-22 pilots who had landed beside him snapped into line, helmets under their arms, eyes locked forward, standing at attention as if they were in the presence of a general. But he wasn't a general. He was something rarer. He was a legend who had walked away, and now he had returned. The crowd of passengers pressed against the windows inside the plane, their phones still filming, trying to capture the moment, but no camera could capture the weight of the silence on that runway, the way the wind seemed to still, the way even the flags on the base held themselves in stiff salute. He nodded once at the pilots, acknowledging their respect without basking in it, and turned to the officer waiting. "Why am I here?" His voice was sharp, direct, the voice of a man used to command. The officer, a colonel by his insignia, swallowed hard. "Sir, there's a situation. One only you can handle. Our satellites picked up hostile activity. We've got unidentified aircraft breaching restricted airspace. The higher-ups, they requested you by name. They said if Ghost Falcon is alive, he's the only one who can stop what's coming." The man closed his eyes for a moment, his daughter's breathing soft against his chest. He had sworn never to fly again, never to put himself in the cockpit where death was just a hair's breadth away. He had promised his late wife, before she passed, that he'd leave it all behind for their child. But promises and reality rarely stayed aligned. If the threat was as grave as they said, ignoring it wasn't an option. Not when innocent lives were at stake. Not when the sky itself was calling him back. "Get her somewhere safe," he said, handing his daughter gently to a young officer who looked more nervous holding her than he had flying combat missions. "Tell her I'll be back soon." He brushed her hair, whispered in her ear, and she stirred only long enough to mumble, "Love you, Daddy," before drifting back into dreams. He straightened, his eyes cold steel once more, and followed the colonel toward the hangar. Inside waited a machine that seemed almost alive, polished and gleaming, the kind of aircraft only the best of the best could dream of touching. It wasn't an F-22. It was something beyond, a prototype built on technology the public hadn't yet seen, a jet designed for speed, stealth, and survival against impossible odds. And on the side, painted in bold letters, was his call sign, Ghost Falcon. The ground crew stood silently, some with awe in their eyes, some with disbelief that the man they thought was gone was here again, about to take the skies once more. Strapping in, his hands moved with muscle memory, every switch, every lever, every instrument as familiar as if no time had passed. The canopy closed, sealing him in the cockpit that had once been his true home. The radio came alive with chatter, the young pilots in the Raptors waiting for his lead. "Ghost Falcon, we're standing by." His voice, calm and steady, filled the airwaves. "Form up. We fly as one." The engines roared, the runway blurred, and within seconds he was airborne, the world below shrinking as the sky opened up before him. What followed was a battle that would never make the news, a dogfight above the clouds against enemy fighters no one was supposed to know existed, machines faster and deadlier than anything seen before. But speed wasn't everything. Skill mattered more. And Ghost Falcon had skill written in his bones. He outmaneuvered, outthought, and outflew, his jet dancing through the sky like it was part of him. The young pilots followed his lead, their awe turning into determination as they realized they were flying beside a master. Every roll, every dive, every impossible escape reminded them why his name had become legend. Hours later, when the threat was neutralized and the skies clear again, Ghost Falcon returned to base, his jet touching down smooth and steady. As the canopy opened, the crowd erupted in cheers, not just military men, but civilians who had heard whispers, engineers who had worked in secret, officers who had prayed for this day. But he didn't look at them. His eyes searched only for his daughter, who ran across the tarmac the moment she saw him, leaping into his arms with a cry of joy. He hugged her tight, breathing her in, grounding himself not in the roar of engines but in the quiet heartbeat of the little girl who was his reason for everything. The colonel approached again, saluting with absolute respect. "Sir, command wants you back. They say the skies need Ghost Falcon." But the man shook his head, his daughter clinging to him, her small voice whispering, "Don't leave me, Daddy." He looked at the colonel, his voice firm. "The skies may need Ghost Falcon. But she needs her father more." With that, he turned away, walking into the setting sun, his daughter in his arms, the legend fading once more into the silhouette of an ordinary man. But every pilot on that base, every officer who stood there, knew the truth. Ghost Falcon wasn't gone. He was watching. And if the world ever truly needed him again, the skies would tremble at his return.